Hmm.
Hmm.
All right, thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and start the meeting again. This is April the 27th, and this is the policy meeting. We're ready to go. Mr. Pendleton?
Great, thanks. The first of the two policies that we have to review tonight is the public participation at board meetings, number 169. And this has been edited since January and everybody should have the Google Docs out to the right where they should see everybody's edits. But let's go, if it's okay with the chairman, let's go paragraph by paragraph to make sure that we've captured everything with this.
Okay.
So we can just kind of, I'll keep track and we'll put the paragraphs. The first in the introduction paragraph, if it had any adjustments to it, we've already made those. We agree on that one?
Yes.
All right. Which one are you talking about? Are you still talking about the public participation?
Yep, just the first, we're just going to go paragraph by paragraph here. Make sure that we get everything captured.
All right. Then excuse me, I might have to log out because my computer's freaking out.
Okay.
I'm trying to fix it. Sorry.
Sure. And Jay, is it okay if I keep going a little bit and then?
Yeah, yes, that's fine. I'll
Okay.
log in when I fix it.
Looks like the first edit that we have is under paragraph A, subset A, with the address the board at apslearns.org. And just to confirm that this email address is already active, it's already posted on our website, and we are already receiving emails.
Okay.
There's no other edits there until the very next paragraph where it starts to maintain the board's commitment to encouraging citizen participation. The board will prohibit, and then there's a suggestion to delete the words will prohibit the time reduction and replace it with will not allow a reduction in the time allotted for the public comment portion. The time reduction of the public comment portion in the order of business where there are members that have followed the principles outlined to address the board. And that's just some wordsmithing, maintained to the board's commitment, encouraging citizens to or will prohibit the time reduction of public comment. And then we had a quick comment on that off to the right. If you look at it, it basically says by a simple majority of the board, or I believe it does relate later by the board president, can waive some of these requirements. I'm okay with, I guess, the importance of saying we will always have public participation at our regular board meetings, unless one, there's no public request, and two, if for whatever reason the board needs to eliminate that portion of the agenda for the night, they can do that by a simple majority, or the board president can do that. That would be highly unlikely, but.
Okay, now where are we at? I'm sorry, I'm back.
Where it starts with the presiding officer now.
Okay. Thank you.
The presiding officer, public participation may be permitted as indicated in the order of business. Must be recognized by the presiding officer and will be requested to preface their comments by an announcement of their name, group affiliation, if and when appropriate. And usually there's subject matter, and on the form that we'll have for the public, we'll have that listed. Dr. Akbar, let's make sure as you get through this, make sure all your comments from the past have been here. Seems like this this policy has been wordsmithed quite a bit, so I want to make sure it has everybody's information in it. Number 4, we're on number 4.
Right.
All statements shall be directed to the presiding officer and or through the officer. No person may address or ask questions of board members individually. That's pretty common practice. Participants will not be permitted to speak on matters related to vendor business matters, formal complaints, grievances, specific students or student records, personal matters, and potential or pending legal matters. And we've had good debate on this for public record as to what this constitutes, and obviously if somebody puts a broad-based topic on their request to address the board, that's what we're going to have to go with. Number 6, tape or video recordings are permitted. The person operating the recorder should contact the superintendent treasurer prior to the board meeting to review possible placement of the equipment. They must agree to abide by the following conditions: no obstructions, obviously, no interviews are conducted in the meeting room while the board is in session, no commentary, adjustment of equipment, or positioning of operators is made that would distract either the board members or the audience. Members of the audience, okay. And then we're at number 7. We had quite a few edits here. Is everybody good?
Yep.
The presiding officer may prohibit public comments that are unrelated to the business of the board or harassing. Interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement when the statement is too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, off-topic, obscene, or irrelevant. Request any individual to leave the meeting when that person does not observe reasonable decorum. Request the assistance of law enforcement officers in the removal of a disorderly person when that person's conduct interferes with orderly progress of the meeting. Call for a recess or adjournment to another time when the lack of public decorum so interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting as to warrant such action. Request the topic be addressed in executive session with the approval of the board when necessary for the protection of privacy or the administration of the board's business. And so we have a note there from both Dr. Akbar and Mary Perkins, clarify in regards to executive session. We also have Diana on the call as well. I'm okay with the way this is written unless somebody wants to wordsmith it. If the board chooses to go into executive session, it has to state a reason for executive session, and we would do that upon advice of counsel. Anybody want to chime in on it?
Hey, Ryan, and that would be that individual who would be speaking to the board would let us know up front so we can make sure we're going to say we're going to go into executive session. Is that correct?
Right. Well, let's run that through. So the individual could have a broad-based topic listed on their sheet and then get into matters that could be required to be kept confidential. The board president here under this section, presiding officer, say, well, we'll take this up at another time, or I request that the board enter into executive session. Is there a motion? And then we would obviously go in for one of our 5 or 6 topics of why we can go into executive session.
Right. So
Okay.
my thought around that is, if, for example, someone does write down a broad topic and it appears on the surface that it's, a regular broad topic that you can talk about, and then they start saying that, well, my daughter specifically was touched inappropriately or whatever, then the president can then interrupt that person from speaking to protect the privacy of that student and whatever potential employee they may be talking about, can, basically interrupt the person speaking and say, that's actually a matter of student record and something that we should go into executive session about. So we will either hear the other, so the president will have, or the presiding officer will have the opportunity to either do whatever is needed, hear the rest of the speakers first, and then go into executive session with that person,
Right.
or specifically request that, that person speaks to them on another date or whatever. But that the presiding officer will have that opportunity there. That's what that's trying to say anyway.
And I think it does, with the addition of request the topic be addressed in executive session. Diana, are you on and are you able to see that?
Yes, I am on and I see that. I mean, I think it's important for the presiding officer to have the maximum flexibility possible, just because as much as we want to anticipate by having a form and by having prior notice of what people are going to say, people can still talk about really whatever they want to once they're given the floor.
Right.
But we also have to be mindful that we can only recess an executive session for sort of the prescribed reasons under the revised code.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think that as written, it would give the presiding officer the opportunity to sort of, yes, interrupt that person politely, and then explain that if they'd like to continue on that topic, that, like you said, Ryan, to then ask for a motion to go into executive session, and then we'll, have to think on the fly of, what basis that would fall under.
Okay.
Yeah, I fully agree with NJ. I'm making sure I'm unmuted here.
You are.
Yeah, I fully agree with NJ, because it is, and we've had these situations a couple of times where it's almost exactly what NJ is describing, where someone says one thing, but they come up and they start talking a little more specifically. So in the 8 years I've been on, we've seen that, and I think a request that the topic be addressed in executive session. And to Diana, to your point, if you felt better if it was worded where it said with the approval of the board when necessary and appropriate, then I think that's great. But I also agree with Diana in that when you're in that seat too, and whether that's NJ next or whoever's after him, that presiding officer needs to have maximum flexibility to be able to just control that meeting as much as possible, still giving deference to the public to be able to speak, but to not necessarily have to be able to cut someone off, I guess, when necessary. So I agree.
And we've done that before. That was part of our previous practice, wasn't it? That the presiding or who's ever in the seat had the opportunity to say we may need to talk about this in executive session and go into executive session if we needed to. Is that correct?
Yes. And the only thing that I disagree with, that I think it was completely removed, and if this is the first time that we've spoken about it in a meeting since before COVID, essentially, there was a sentence in there in section Really, I think it was the previous section. I agree, and I think we all agreed that since these are requests to address the board and not requests to address the superintendent, that it was fine possibly if we removed the reference to the superintendent. But I think the presiding officer / board president, whoever that may be, and I'm doing this not just for me, I don't really care, but I think for whoever's in that seat, needs to be able to capture some of these up front. Sometimes you do get a request that's perfectly written, it's perfectly formal, it's perfectly valid, but it requests to address something that should be addressed in executive session or shouldn't be addressed at all, especially when it's on the advice of legal counsel that this person may be skirting due process. I think that presiding officer / president needs the ability to do those. And my suggestion for language, which the whole sentence seems to have been removed, was that the board president or the presiding officer repeat that or report that to the board at that meeting. Like, hey, we had a request to address the board about a teacher that may have inappropriately touched a student. We're not hearing that person first and then taking a vote and deciding whether or not we want to hear it in executive session. I already told that person, we'll hear this in executive session or we won't be able to hear it. And I don't like that sentence was removed. I think that that's a reasonable thing to keep in there. But I'll open it up.
Mm-hmm.
Where was it?
So it used to say right before, if you go up a little bit, so we're in like number 7. If you went up 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it was like right in there somewhere. And it used to say the presiding officer or the board president, I don't remember what it said, the presiding officer or the superintendent had the ability to basically say no, or to say that this will be addressed in executive session. I don't remember what that language was. I put in a comment that it should be changed. We all agreed that maybe since it's a request to address the board, that maybe it'd be okay to remove superintendent. And my language to protect the board was so that me or NJ, say you, are not just telling people no and then not telling the board, is that okay, if you tell someone no, you have to promptly report that to the board and let them know why you told them no. And of course, it would only be for valid reasons, right? I mean, the presumption here is that NJ is not going to violate, anybody's right to speak to the board or address the board unless there's a reason why he's protecting the board. So it was in there somewhere. Somehow when Mary sent out this most recent version, it was completely removed.
Yeah, is it where does it say public participation may be permitted at the discretion of the presiding officer?
Where do you see that?
That's in our current policy.
Maybe, but there was also a line somewhere in our current policy about the presiding officer and superintendent, and I think we all agreed to maybe remove superintendent.
Okay. Yes,
it does. I remember that piece too, and it was some discussion on that.
It is at the start of the second full paragraph. It says, such requests shall be subject to the approval of the superintendent and board president.
So one of the reasons why that was taken out was because we removed it because the board or the conversations we were having was all around removing the right to say no so much in advance. So, for example, it still gives the number 7, the presiding officer, the right to request that topic to be addressed in executive session. We can add to that sentence or add a G that says can deny a request only if it violates a whatever you called it. I can't even think of the words you used. But if it denies a bargaining unit,
well, and for me, and NJ, this is as much for you again, when you're in this chair, we have had those and well, and let me back up for a second. When we stopped having the meetings or discussions, that line was still in there. So I don't know how it came out or who okayed it coming out, because that's what these discussions are for. When this is as much for you too, you will get those requests where they're very explicit. I want to address the board about somebody that touched my child. You shouldn't need to be in regular session, hear the beginning of it, and then stop them and request to address that in executive session if you know in advance that that's already going to be something that should be addressed in executive session. You, NJ, should be able to tell that person, look, we hear you. We want to hear from you. I'm going to request that this one be an executive session, and just right off the bat, we take that one into executive session before they say too much in public, because you can't undo that. If the opening line is, I want to talk to you about how Mr. Skelly tried to rape my 15-year-old boy, I don't want to hear that in public session and then ask if we can go into executive session. If I know that that's what you want to talk about, I'd rather do that up front and then tell the board promptly. We also have a request to address the board that has been slated for executive session. We'll hear that one before we hear the others, in the interest of time, or, whatever.
Right. And I hear exactly what you're saying. I just want to remind everyone, this is a public meeting.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Comment too. Isn't that the process anyhow, that the presiding officer would already know what is going on before we even get to the meeting, so they would know whether to say yay or nay, or to talk to the board and say this is one that needs to go in executive session?
If I can respond, Mr. Alexander, the typical procedure has been, if there is something in a request that either myself, our district legal counsel, or the chief financial officer feels should be, talked about in executive session, we typically will do that before the board meeting, either, directly with the president. So a decision can be made to say this topic is for executive session. There have been occasions in the past when a person comes, before the board and they get up to talk about something, and then they want to mention, for instance, an employee by name. And in the past, we have immediately then gone into executive session or said, you need to hold your comments and we'll adjourn to executive session at the appropriate time to discuss those, typically at the same meeting.
Right. And that's why I was getting, I thought that was the process, which it was already be done beforehand, so we would all know if we're going to have to go in executive session or not. And if someone does say something that mention the name or someone they shouldn't, then that presiding officer would stop them at that point and say, hey, you can't talk about any names and so forth and da-da-da. And then they will be able to continue on if they want. If we need to go in executive session, the presiding officer would at that time say that we need to go into executive session.
Can we add, possibly just kind of hearing from everyone, if we go back and rewrite the policy line that had been removed and say such request shall be subject to the approval of the board president upon consultation with the superintendent?
We could, I think it would be something we could say, Ryan, but I guess this is just a thought. We say the president, what if the president's not there that day at a meeting and it comes up and the vice president is there?
Presiding officer.
Should we say, or something like person presiding over the meeting?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
I just am throwing that out there. I don't.
Right.
So one of my, we can say that I think that what we could say that's fine, but all of this will be happening literally minutes before the meeting starts. So the president or presiding officer is usually sitting next to the superintendent and the treasurer, who I'm assuming would be the one to collect all of the signatures or what have you.
Right.
That's just my assumption.
Yeah.
And I said signatures, but the people who signed up to
Yeah.
speak.
Right.
And then you would review it right there in front of everybody. You would look at the list. You would say, okay, this person seems like it should be executive session based off what they wrote. We can either, in fact, what we probably could do is if an executive session is needed and it's told to us right in less than a certain amount of time, then we can request that executive session be potentially after that day. So we could do something like that, or we can just say that depending upon what it is, if it's a dispute between an employee dispute, you can refer that one to the proper chain of command or process, which is outlined in their with their union. So you can look at it, you can see what it is, and make some of those determinations right there, right before the meeting. Again, we have 20 minutes unless we decide to extend it. So that's only going to give a certain number of people an opportunity to speak, as we want to still be efficient and productive. So that will, and I'm assuming you're not going to get 7-8 people at every meeting. This is only going to be a few meetings where this would even be a problem, or I wouldn't even call it a problem, but that would potentially go over 20 minutes is really what I'm trying to say. So that's my thought. I don't know if we need to necessarily put it in there, but we can. But again, all of this is happening right before the meeting starts. And the goal of one of the reasons why some of that language from the current policy was taken out is because it required a lot of it to be done in advance.
Right. And couldn't and Brian gets this gets the notification to address the board up front, and I'm sure he has time to maybe talk to the presiding officer to say, here's what's going on, here's what you have, and they could know beforehand instead of just before the meeting as to what's going to be occurring and so forth. So that presiding officer would probably know that beforehand to let the other board members know, here's the one that we might have to address the board and go in executive session.
Diana, I hear everybody's concern about this one. If in item 7, the presiding officer said can prohibit public comments that are unrelated to the business of the board, is there an item in there that we can strengthen a little bit so that we're not saying the superintendent and board president, but it seems like we could do that in number 7, so it's not so abrupt in the beginning of the policy.
Right.
It maybe falls under F.
Yeah, because I think NJ's right. I mean, some of this will occur ahead of time. The way we've got it structured now, he's right. You're right that some of it's going to be happening as we're sitting there. My only concern is to give you or any other board member the ability to stop it before those words are uttered. So I think, to Ryan's point, if there's even just a way we can strengthen one that's already in there without putting the old sentence back, I'm fine with that. I just don't want to tie your hands in the future if you know something is really bad and is there. Because again, most of these do come in person or come in advance. some of them, like you said, now are going to be coming while we're kind of sitting there right up until the meeting starts. So it's never going to catch everything, but as long as we can not tie your hands as much as possible, I think that's a good thing.
Can't we put something in 7B? Because that seems like a logical place for it to fit.
Well, I think
Yeah,
I don't think Patrick, and I could be wrong. I don't think Patrick is talking about just when they say something that goes beyond what we've read. I think his concern is about what if their comment or what they wrote that their topic was is very clear that it would be either something that shouldn't go before the board, it violates a board policy or contractual agreement. I think that's really what he's saying. And if that's the case, then I agree with Ryan that A probably is a better place to just add something between the or and unrelated to the board, the business of the board, such as so instead of saying unrelated to the business of the board, comma, you would say violate board policy or contractual agreements or harassment.
They're so numerous to name that I would say, agreeing with NJ, I would say something like including but not limited to topics that would violate HIPAA, FERPA, contractual agreements, whatever, but including but not limited to, right? Because there's going to be those weird things that you don't think of. I mean, there's so many things they could violate in there.
Yeah. But if you just say laws or in board policy and contracts, wouldn't that cover a whole wealth of different things?
Diana, if you're
What
still
about if we just said, or in under A, or matters that are required in executive session?
Well,
Is that too broad?
Yeah, let me jump in here. You're all right. Every component of what you're saying is accurate, and there can and will and have been instances where every one of the circumstances. But I also get the sensitivity to writing something that's so bold to say your request will be denied when we say it's denied. We obviously want to do that. That's why we have Diana on the phone, who I'm hoping, even if it's not done now, can take some of these comments back. I believe what we want to do can be done in 7 adequately. And I think along I think where NJ was saying violation of board policy, because in board policy is the due process as it relates to union contracts, and we're not going to violate due process when the superintendent hasn't ruled on a personnel matter or something like that. So we probably can add a couple enhancements to one of these letters, and I would ask that Diana do that if you guys are okay. And as soon as we get that done, we can email it back.
Yeah, so if I can jump in here, I think it's important to understand that some of the reasons to deny a board request, like a violation of FERPA or the due process that you're talking about, isn't necessarily a reason that you can recess into executive session.
Right.
Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. But for example, it's not necessarily appropriate to go into executive session because of a FERPA violation. But it is appropriate to maybe deny someone or rechannel their request or help them refine their request to address the board so that they do not violate a student's privacy, right? So I think there needs to be, as everyone's discussing, some sort of separate language to address those types of issues that, they're just not appropriate for a public forum to talk about a specific student or, to violate, something that would violate due process rights. So I can certainly, draft something that would, fully articulate what the board is getting at, but be broad enough, like Patrick was referencing, to kind of be a catch-all so that, the presiding officer has the discretion to make that call.
What does everybody think about that?
I like the idea of a catch-all, because that way we'll be protected no matter what.
I like it, but to NJ's point, I would still put in some protection in there that says that that presiding officer or board president, you have to tell the board, I did this and here's why. So you must
Sure.
report to the board.
Sure.
So if you could just include language like that too.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
We can
agree.
turn that language around fairly quickly.
Right. I don't think it's even I don't even think it's a bad practice. Actually, I think it would be a good practice to even be able to say publicly that we received 5 requests to address the board. 3 are going to be speaking to us today. 1 was is possibly going to be delayed because more information is needed, and 1 was denied because it violated board policy and will be taken up in a different matter. I think that is a good practice. It shows that we're being very open with everyone about what has happened.
I agree, NJ. I like that.
All right. That leaves us with item 8.
Let's see.
And Alan's got a comment in there. So item 8, in order to remain committed to a proactive and efficient meeting, the board may provide a period for public participation limited to no less than 20 minutes per meeting, unless extended by a simple majority vote of the board. Public participation will be recognized within the time allotted for that meeting by the presiding officer. Alan's comment is, this appears to suggest that there will be a set 20 minutes regardless of whether we have somebody signed up to address the board or not. Should it say limited to no less than 20 minutes per meeting unless extended by a simple majority? I agree with her, and I think it achieves the same thing.
Yeah, I think that the way it's written does that too, but either way, it does the same thing, both of them.
Yeah.
So whatever the preference is.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with it. It's now too. So, so let's talk about next steps with this policy, unless anybody has any more or substantial edits. I took some notes there. That's something that Diana can take a look at, and David and I can kind of sign off, get you a final version of it. And this has been through a few readings, and then we can bring this to the next board meeting. Does that sound like good next steps?
Good for me.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. I think it's been well vetted and lots of discussion about it. So I think we just have the one outstanding item that we just don't want something so bold in the beginning of the policy that says your request may be denied because I say it was denied. Instead, we will wordsmith it somewhere in item 7 under the presiding officer.
So I have a question, and I know my computer is acting up, so I had to log out and log back in. So you probably addressed this, but Patrick had mentioned before about the email address being in the policy.
Yes.
What was the resolution on that?
I think they said it's up and running.
Yeah, it's
It
already
is up and running.
Using that one now.
Yeah,
And so
I'm
the
good.
board-
I'm good with that if everyone else is. I'm always in favor of like writing it.
Yeah, it's up and running. We received requests. Even today, we got some interactions about graduation.
But I'm good with it.
I'm fine with that too.
Yeah.
Valerie, NJ? Good?
Yeah. No, that's fine.
I'm good either way.
Great. All right. Making progress here. We've got APS naming or renaming facility policy. Everybody ready to dial into that one?
Yes. And Ryan, can I say something before we start on it? This is the one that I just kind of put together. And this is nowhere by means nothing that I know a whole lot about. And it really saying that we need to take this, but I'm open for anybody and everybody to participate till we come up with a good policy, because it's going to affect us now, and it'll affect us as well as future board members in the future.
Yeah, and I agree with Bruce. The other piece of it is I think we should try to get this done by the summer. Because I know we're probably going to, at some point, even get more requests.
That's a good backdrop. I appreciate that. So we're not having to push for this policy right now.
Right.
We can. So let's do a read through now, and maybe tackle some big picture items. The first one is from Deborah Falk in the suggestion to change the name to the commemorative naming of an APS building and facility. Anybody have any thoughts on that? I mean, it's basically stated as naming or renaming facility policy now.
You say that again, Ryan, so I can catch that again.
Changing the name from APS naming or renaming facility policy to commemorative naming of an APS building and or facility.
Did she give a reason for the change, just out of curiosity? Because I'm fine, I guess, with either, but I thought the name was okay.
She did not. I think the key word there is commemorative. Does that, obviously that generally speaking fits what we do, but is there any circumstance where it wouldn't?
Well, commemorative naming is more of a standard name. So, like, I just Googled it and like tons of things comes up. Commemorative naming in the United States, commemorative naming and guidelines associated with the United Nations, with University of Vancouver, parks and recreation facilities. So
yeah, I'm good with either.
Yeah. Okay. We will accept that one. And let's just do a quick read through. The purpose of this policy is to establish the criteria, process, and procedures for naming of buildings, athletic fields, auditoriums, stadiums, gymnasiums, libraries, multi-purpose rooms, and training rooms. That's pretty specific. Does that exclude anything or overly descript something?
I mean, right now that doesn't even include the Dr. Walker boardroom. I mean, there could be a room in one of our buildings that we want to name. So I don't know why it needs to be multi-purpose room.
Yeah.
You could say, or other facilities or physical. You could say something like, or other facilities or physical locations or something.
That's the same thing I was thinking, Patrick.
Okay.
Yeah, because you could name an atrium after somebody if you wanted to. That's just an area, an opening, you know.
So are you putting dibs on the? Are you putting dibs on the Sylvester Small atrium there, NJ?
No, I'm not actually. But
All right. I'm gonna
Now that you
keep
think, say it,
it's dinner time.
Right.
might need to put a bid in.
Under policy section, from time to time, the Akron Board of Education may wish to commemorate a school or district facility which is owned by the board. The board considers facility to include, but not limited to, buildings, athletic buildings. Right. Okay, so we need to broaden this one as well. Let me put that. All right, I'll make a note there. Such commemorations should be reserved only for those individuals who have made a significant contribution to the enhancement of education generally, the district in particular, or to the well-being of the district, community, state, or nation. The evidence of this service must be demonstrated through definite and objective evidence. Kind of an interesting comment. Any thoughts there?
I mean, at first read, I kind of liked it. I mean, I get what it's saying. The definite and objective evidence.
I just think again, we just probably.
Okay.
I mean, that's the objective.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I missed this. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're a little bit lagged again.
Okay, maybe you can't. Sorry. I'm on mute.
I think we could leave that last sentence up altogether, couldn't we?
The evidence of service must be demonstrated through definite and objective evidence.
Could be.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with.
Can you hear me now?
I agree with Valerie. Yes.
I'm okay with that.
I agree with Valerie in a sense that those things are subjective anyway. I mean, there's really no objective test or definitive test for that.
Okay. Does anybody? Oh, so I deleted that. It should take and record a note to the side. Since this is not an existing policy, I'm not a strict strikeout and track changes. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, on to criteria. Individuals or groups to be commemorated must have made a significant contribution to the field of education, government, science, or human betterment. And then Patrick, do you want to cover your comment?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could call, LeBron James or Chrissy Hind or someone else. We could put them under the category of human betterment, but I don't know, I guess as educators, is the language here a little limiting and kind of dismissive of maybe the arts? Or so I didn't know if there was a better way to word that, or I mean, I could live with it the way it is, but it maybe is a little dismissive of it certainly doesn't treat arts or anything else as the same as education, government, or science.
I agree. I think the word could be refined a bit.
But the sentiment is right, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we want to include everybody in there, so I want to make sure we do include all in there, because arts is big. Because look at what they want to do over at one school.
Okay. I am marking this one up. Number 2, no facility shall be named in honor of a person who is actively employed by Akron Public Schools. If the name, and so here's Patrick, this was for you again, correct? You want to take, without me interpreting, why don't you take that one again?
Yeah, we limit it right now. The language says to actively employed by, and so I just said, you know, there have been a lot of names, especially when we were looking at Kenmore Garfield, and this is going to come back up when Kenmore Garfield reopens, because the promise was that we would be led by the kids since they're the ones that go there. But we received an enormous amount of community input from people who thought it should be named, you know, after Plasqualuk or after LeBron James or after someone else. So I just said, you know, what about coaches? Like, do we want to look at when and under what circumstances these folks would actually qualify? Is there a nomination process or a vetting process? You might say that, you know, LeBron James or someone should qualify, but how do we check to see that that's a name that we want to put on a building? And I think NJ or someone else brought this up before, that, you know, so if you're looking at the public sphere and the number of installations or buildings or physical plants that people have named after someone that are, you know, in recent history being removed, having a second look at history, what kind of process do we have for making sure that not just that they're currently employed, but what's the vetting process or nomination process for a name?
I agree with you there, Patrick, too. We need to have some type of vetting for sure.
Well, especially if we leave it up to the students, we can't just, you know, if 51% of the students want a particular person and that person might be most popular to the kids, but it might certainly be someone we don't necessarily want a building named after.
Correct. Yeah.
So there must be a process in place to vet the candidates.
And what happens when we do get two sort of equally important names?
Yeah,
Now, this comment number 2 under the criteria here specifically speaks to people that are employed by, and certainly I don't think, you know, that at least my knee-jerk reaction is I think this is a good comment, but I guess my question was, in addition to that, you know, what happens to all these other things? What's the nominating? What's the vetting? What happens when we get more than one important name suggested? You know, if it was, you know, 2 really big names, how do we vet and make that decision? Is there any guidance?
Maybe that's a process we need to think about and we need to put in there, because we don't have that in here stating how we would vet. And if there is 2 people are close, which name would we use and so forth. So maybe that's some more research we may need to do to find out more about something like that.
Yep.
And so Deb Folks is the green suggestion, which may not be a bad one either, I suppose. If you're still currently an elected or official or civil servant, then I don't know if retired is the right word. I mean, you could quit also without necessarily retiring, but I think the sentiment in this bullet point is correct. I just think it leads to other questions. So I'm actually fine with the bullet point, I think, itself, but I think we need to answer some other questions with it.
Good. I'm taking notes as we go along. We have some research to do. Item 3 there, with respect to naming, special consideration shall be given to historical significance, the association of the individual, recognition of the individual contribution or achievement. In all cases, naming rights are considered to be in effect for the duration of the effective and typical useful life of this facility, not into perpetuity. And then we have a component there. Consider what to do if a building closes, moves to another site, which I think we've handled quite well. with some of the closures and namings and consolidations. If necessary, the board reserves the right to remove a name associated with any facility at any time to protect the best interest of the district. So there's the catch-all.
I don't know how this works, but just some thoughts in there too. When I was looking at this, at one point I had suggested that we maybe let people know up front, you know, if we know the useful life is 25 years, then maybe we tell them that, because we do end up with buildings with names that meant something to people 50 years ago, but nobody knows necessarily who they are now. And maybe that's the point, is to keep that name alive, but also it kind of ties the board a little bit if they want to do something differently. So I don't know if there's, I mean, and maybe it's fine as written. I don't know what other people think, but I'm curious, because some of these names kind of tend to live for quite a long time. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not.
Doesn't the not in perpetuity cover that though?
Yes. Certainly it tells people we're not going to do this forever, but.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess when I look at that, it could be, like we're saying, 50 years from now, or even now, there could be a name of something that maybe some negative connotations come with it, or it's something that, you know, kids or no one else from the community probably have any idea of who this person may be. And if the board feels at that time it may need to be removed, then they should have that option.
Yeah, I'm fine with it the way it is. I just was curious on other people's thoughts. Is NJ still here, right?
Yeah, I texted him just to make sure he was okay, because there was definitely a gap or a lag in some of his. Yeah, he's definitely not able to connect. He's on video.
Looks like he's on video now. I didn't see him on video before. It looks like he's back.
Technically, we should probably wait for him to be able to rejoin.
Yeah, let's reboot.
Can you hear me?
Now we can, just there.
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
You're gone again. Nope, you're back.
He's going to go get close to that Wi-Fi.
If you hold the tinfoil up here.
That's right.
Patrick, what do you know about that? You get old school there.
That's right.
That's right.
The rabbit ears.
Oh my goodness.
I just don't want him to miss out on anything.
No, he should be able to comment on it. Looks like he's coming back now. There we go.
No.
Not quite, NJ.
Here.
There's still quite a bit of lag.
Are you sure? Because can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
Can hear you. The audio is still behind the video though, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's still significant lag there. Something's up. Either he's raising his hand for a question or in disgust, one of the two.
Yeah, I can see him. We could hear him before. We can't hear him now.
He just logged off. Well, we made it through with that policy, with the exception of 2 paragraphs.
Maybe we could ask him if he is able to join at least just by calling in for
Yeah,
the moment.
I will text him. Can you join by calling in? Does anybody have any, oh, here we go.
Did that work?
That sounds better. So
There you go.
Can you hear me?
we can.
All right. Sorry about that.
All right, we're in good shape. That's great. Okay, NJ, you with us?
Yeah. Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. So there's not too bad of a lag there. So we'll keep pushing forward here. If not, you can always do the call in.
Yeah. Then you don't have to stop for me because this is, I don't know what's going on with this. I'll just keep going.
Okay. I will contact you offline though for board meetings if there continues to be a lag, and maybe we can get you a hotspot just dedicated to your PC. That way we can, you're not struggling to connect.
Okay. Which is
Okay.
so weird because I don't have this problem on my personal computer.
Okay. So this is your Chromebook.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We have 2 more sections left to review under process and then dedication ceremony and plaque. The board may request the superintendent to solicit public input from the community, which may be in the form of a community forum, community survey, appointing a community-based or advisory committee to assist the board in the process. The advisory committee may include administrators, parents, and other employees deemed necessary by the superintendent. Whenever practical, the board should seek the input or recommendation of the superintendent. There's some good notes off to the right from Patrick, as well as I know David. Just in my tenure with the board, you've gone through this process. I don't know if you want to give any additional clarity there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't make the recommendations. They'll have input from like a community or whether it's students or what have you. And then that information goes to the board because the board has really the final say. So if there's any questions regarding, any background that the board needs, the administration follows up and provides that, to the presiding officer.
Does the paragraph capture what you do? Should we specifically mention students in that process, or do you think it's covered under advisory?
I personally, I think it might be a good idea to mention students because they have done some things in the past, with
Okay.
this. When we combine two buildings, I think it's always respectful to have the input of students. And again, even if students get into the earlier question about what happens if there are two candidates, the board makes a decision, and I think under item 3, there's enough leeway, for the board to make that decision.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. And to David's point, as soon as we announced the closure of Kenmore and the merger of Kenmore-Garfield together, we went with Kenmore-Garfield. And in case anyone's wondering, we put Kenmore first out of respect to the fact that they were the ones that were technically losing a building. So we put them first, whereas Harris-Jackson, we just went in alphabetical order. But immediately we started getting solicitations of all kinds of names, many that you would recognize as to what the new Kenmore-Garfield should be named. So we said that we would come back to the community and we would at least pay particular attention to the students because they were the ones who were inheriting this new building as opposed to the community at large. The more we build in a process here, I think, the safer at some point the board is in having this discussion and making a decision, and keeping in mind that all of this discussion and the decision will be made in open session. So, I'm always in favor of maybe defining a little bit of a process before you're kind of faced with having to make that difficult decision and very public decision. But that's just my opinion.
I agree, Patrick. I think it do needs to be a process there, so we'll know.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the thoughts that I had, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
One of the thoughts that I had was that the committee or advisory committee could submit the top 2 or 3 names to the board, and then the board picks from there.
Yeah, I like that idea, and it doesn't prevent the board from also, still including other suggestions. And that's certainly something I think we can do under this process. I just want to plant the seed, but I like that too. Yeah. And I don't even know if anything I'm suggesting requires a change in this policy. It's just conversation stuff I wanted to throw out there. So
It's probably a good time, Patrick, just to do a reminder whether or not it's for this policy or others, but board policy should be sometimes left a little bit vague so that the board has discretion over matters and then can work administrative guidelines to be the specifics. Now, this one's a little bit different, but it is a good reminder for us. Okay, the last section is under the dedication ceremony and plaque. Upon approval of the naming by the board, an appropriate dedication ceremony may be planned and conducted by the school. The district, school themselves to not erect dedication. The district may erect a dedication plaque or comparable marking upon approval of the naming by the board, and the plaque may be separate from the facility, provided state, local regulation and board permit. Okay. I get the intent of that. Anybody else on that specific?
I'm good.
Right. I didn't realize I was on mute. I guess I don't understand the last part about the plaque may be from the facility.
Yeah, I think in that part, NJ, it was that the plaque or whatever it may be doesn't have to be connected to the building. For example, someone puts something out in front of a school, it's not connected to the building.
Oh, do we need to say that then?
We can.
Okay. I don't see the purpose of that part.
In my head, and I didn't write that, but in my head, the only thing that I'm thinking, and that's because we're doing this kind of right now, we're having this discussion with my facility for work, is the possibility of more like a historical marker that goes out in front of the building versus a plaque that's attached to the building.
Right.
Because my facility will be named after someone very prominent in the community, but it's not going to be attached to the facility. It's gonna, we actually want it closer to the sidewalk where you can see it. My only guess is maybe that's why someone wrote it that way.
Well, we also have a variety of memorial benches, memorial tree plantings from like the PTA for maybe a child that passed away that would be on the school grounds. And a lot of times those things have a plaque with them, or stones or bricks that will have an engraving in them. Those are prevalent throughout the district.
Okay.
Okay.
Good point.
I'm good.
That makes sense. Yeah.
All right. So it looks like we have a little bit longer runway on this one. We'll take the board's comments back to administrative staff and work these through, wordsmith, and get it back to the next legal policy. In the meantime, the public participation 169.1 has received considerable amount of attention, and we've got a few things to clarify, clean up, and provide the form that would be established at the board meetings. And our plan would be, as I look at my calendar, today, the 27th, we have our board meetings the May 4th because of Memorial Weekend.
Yes.
Everybody okay with us getting it on May 4th? If we can get some edits out here shortly.
Yeah.
That's good.
And on this policy, Ryan, too, if we could make sure to, just because it's legally speaking, it's kind of a pet peeve. If we could let Diana or someone clean it up in terms of defined terms and stuff like that.
Yes.
In some spaces we call it Akron board, and some we call it the district, and some we call it just the board. It's, yeah, just clean it up a little.
Very good. So next Monday, we should get some edits out in the next couple days.
Good deal.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
All we have?
NJ's good.
Anyone else have anything?
All right.
Yeah, I guess if not, we're done.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody enjoy. Have a good day, good week.
Take
Yeah, you-
care.
Bye.
Okay.